Today, we're diving into a really pivotal moment in American history. We're going to look at that constant, tricky tug of war between keeping the nation secure and protecting civil liberties, all through the lens of the World War I home front. And really, this whole thing boils down to one massive question. When a country's at war, where do you draw the line? How do you keep people safe without giving up the very freedoms you're supposedly fighting to protect? It's a huge dilemma, and the U.S. had to face it head on. All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with a look at just how divided the nation was. Then we'll see how the government tried to sell the war to the public and what happened when that wasn't enough. We'll get into the legal battles, the human cost of it all, and wrap up with the question that, honestly, we're still wrestling with today. So to really get this, we have to go back to 1917. America wasn't this unified giant ready to jump into the fight. Not at all. It was a country that was seriously split on whether it should get involved in a huge European war. I mean, just think about it for a second. The U.S. was a nation of immigrants, right? Millions of people had deep family ties to the very countries that were now on opposite sides of the battlefield. You had pacifists, socialists, and a ton of people who just wanted America to stay out of it. So the government's biggest battle wasn't overseas, it was right here at home. So what do? You've got this divided, hesitant public. How do you get them on board for a world war? Well, the first move wasn't about building up the army. It was about launching one of the biggest persuasion campaigns you've ever seen. And the engine behind this whole effort was a new government agency called the Committee on Public Information, or the CPI. It was run by a guy named George Creel, and his job was simple but huge: convince Americans that this war was a noble crusade for democracy. And they went all in. We're talking a complete media blitz. Patriotic posters were everywhere. Millions and millions of pamphlets were printed. They even got Hollywood to make pro-war movies. Every newspaper, every public space was flooded with this one simple message: we have to fight. But here's the really clever part. They created this volunteer army called the 4-Minute Men. These guys would literally stand up in movie theaters right before the film started and in just 4 minutes deliver this passionate, patriotic speech to get everyone fired up. It was genius, a totally grassroots way to get the message out there. But, persuasion doesn't always work on everyone. So what happens when people just aren't buying it? Well, that's when the government strategy took a much darker turn, from persuasion to punishment. And this slide? It lays out the government strategy perfectly. It's the classic carrot and stick approach. On one side, you have the carrot, all the positive, patriotic propaganda from the CPI. But on the other side, you had the stick, a couple of new, very powerful laws designed to shut down anyone who dared to speak out. And boy, did they move fast on this. Just a year after entering the war, Congress passed the Espionage Act. And then, a year later, they doubled down with the even tougher Sedition Act. So what did these laws actually do? Well, that's the scary part. They made it a federal crime to interfere with the military draft. Okay, you might think that makes sense. But they also made it illegal to say, print, or write anything that was critical of the government, the flag, or the military. All of a sudden, just disagreeing with the war could land you in serious trouble. And make no mistake, this wasn't just some law on the books. It was enforced. Thousands of people were arrested. The famous socialist leader Eugene Debs was thrown in prison for 10 years just for giving a speech against the war. Pacifists, union leaders, regular citizens, they all learned that freedom of speech suddenly had its limits. Okay, so when you pass laws this sweeping, you know they're going to be challenged, right? Of course they were. And that set the stage for a major showdown at the Supreme Court, with the First Amendment itself hanging in the balance. The case that changed everything was called Schenck versus the United States. Charles Schenck was a socialist who had handed out flyers that told people to resist the military draft. He got arrested, obviously, and his case made it all the way to the top. Now, what came out of this case was a brand new legal idea that we still talk about today, the clear and present danger test. Basically, the court said, look, your freedom of speech isn't absolute. If what you say creates a clear and present danger that could harm the country, especially during a war, then the government can shut you down. And the decision came back unanimous. The Supreme Court sided with the government. This was huge. It established a legal precedent that in times of crisis, the government has the power to limit civil liberties. It was a decision that would echo for generations. But the impact of all this wasn't just felt in the high-minded world of legal precedent. It was felt on the ground, in communities. creating this really ugly atmosphere of fear that had a very real human cost. And German Americans got hit especially hard. I mean, think about it. The enemy was Germany, so anything German became suspect. People were harassed, they lost their jobs just for having a German sounding name. German language newspapers were forced to close. Schools even stopped teaching the German language. It was a full blown campaign of cultural repression, all in the name of patriotism. And that fear spread like wildfire. It wasn't just German Americans, it was immigrants, union members, anyone who didn't seem patriotic enough. It created this chilling effect where people were afraid to speak their minds for fear of being labeled a traitor. So that brings us to the big takeaway here. Because this story, it's not just a history lesson. It's a perfect example of a fundamental tension that's baked right into American democracy. What World War I showed everyone, in no uncertain terms, is that our need for security and our love of liberty don't always play nice together. In fact, they're often in direct conflict. And the government's actions back then raised these huge, uncomfortable questions about how much power the state should have when it feels like the nation is under threat. And so we end up right back where we began, facing that same timeless question. How does a free society balance its own safety against the very freedoms that make it a free society in the first place? There's no easy answer, and it's a question that every single generation, including ours, has to answer for itself.